welcome everybody to our live. We are on a Tuesday, sometimes we are, and a huge welcome to Rob Stewart here, who I'm very, very excited to have here with us today. So Rob, for anyone who doesn't know you, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Well, thank you for having me, Emma. Absolute pleasure. I apologise, it looks like I'm in a fish tank. We seem to be very slightly overexposed on the blue on these settings, but it's cool. We'll deal with it. So very briefly, my name's Rob, so hello. I have been investing in property for about 15 years now. Previously, I was a pilot in the RAF and transitioned from that into property and have been, growing a portfolio, kind of building it up for the last 15 years or so.
Amazing, amazing. So the reason I wanted Rob to come on here today is that he talks about what he calls his property unicorn strategy. So I've got his book here. It's really fantastic. And I've also done one of his courses. And we all hear about all the different strategies, and all of them, according to everyone, is a unicorn strategy. But I really think that Rob has nailed this one. It's very accessible for what I would call people who, aren't necessarily huge developers. It's a really accessible strategy. And what's great about it is I'm not going to say hands-free because that's not true, but it's basically less hands-on, and you get a really great monthly recurring income on his kind of strategy. So I thought absolutely. So I've got some mentees as well. So I've said to them, look, you've got to jump on because these are the sort of things that you guys need to be doing. So hopefully they'll have lots of questions coming in. So that's really, for me, Rob has this strategy basically around mixed use property. So I really wanted to get him on, find out a little bit of his story, how he managed to get there, and then chat on that. So let's jump in. So Rob, I'm very excited that I've got a real live maverick on
the unicorn.
I feel like, in fact, I nearly watched it last night. So so that's great. Top Gun, here we go. Tell us a bit about your flying background, and also I know it's really nice, isn't it? But when I think of my past, the kind of roles that I did, how I've managed to kind of implement some of those learnings into your property, how has it kind of affected you? Because there's not going to be many of us who are, have been pilots like you.
Yeah, really good question, Emma. So in a nutshell, I joined the Air Force in 2001. So a long time ago now, just before we went into Afghanistan, and was very lucky to have a career flying fast jets. I was a Tornado F3 pilot, which is air defense, did a lot of flying around the world, a lot of time in the Falkland Islands. And then I went back into the training system as a Hawk tactics instructor, if you like, where I was basically teaching students to operate the airplane as a weapons platform, and did that for a few years before going to South Africa on exchange tour in 2010, which kind of was not the right move for me, it turned out. This was a case of going somewhere with grand expectations, it not turning out as I wanted it to turn out, and then realizing that the world doesn't have your back, right? No, when you're in a job, nobody's really looking after you that well. I'm not going to go into the details, but I decided to leave the Air Force at that point. So I came out in 2011. Now, when I transitioned into civilian life, I didn't have any intention or aspiration of getting into property. I was actually looking for a job in the airlines. 2010, 2011, bottom of the last recession, nobody was recruiting. So it was not a great time to be looking for jobs in civilian world. So I just started with some of the savings I had, buying little small buy-to-let properties. Your standard up in the north, 30, 35,000 pound purchases, do a bit of some renovation refurb on it, get it refinanced, stick a tenant in. And that was kind of the start of the journey, and worked out before I did any sort of education and thing like that. This sort of BRR, which people call it now, is it BRRRRRR, however many R's you want to put on the end of it, depending who you are, kind of fell into that by accident, because we were, sort of about 45,000 in after the refurb, and they were getting revalued at 60, 65,000, pulling most of the money out. I was like, well, okay, that's pretty cool. Stick a tenant in. It was easier back then. And just started doing those, getting a sort of conveyor belt of those. Now, you said or you asked, what did you take from the military in terms of skill set? Well, in terms of hard skill set, absolutely nothing. There was very little in terms of, flying an aeroplane that was directly transferable to property. But what was directly transferable was the mindset. So that sort of high performance mindset, and also in the military, it's very much a lifestyle. It's a culture rather than just a 9-to-5 job. And I feel that sort of was gave me a lot of acceleration in my property world, because I just kind of approached it in the same way, in that sort of, it's your life, it's now what you're doing, it's not a job. And so, put those high performance techniques to work in property. Don't get me wrong, there's also a lot of bad things that being in the military gave me. Inability to manage team very well was one of them. Being a little bit finicky and high performance driven, and suddenly working out that when you're out of the military, not everybody in the real world does what they say they're going to do all the time. So that was an adjustment. But yeah, that was the start of the journey, and just carried on building it from there.
Amazing. Yeah, I really love that. And just guys, just so that we know where you're all tuning in from, if you could pop in the chat whereabouts in the country you are, because I'm literally down south and Rob's a bit sort of further and across. So it's always good so we can sort of tailor that as well.
I'm actually down south as well at the moment. So I live in Winchester, but I invest in Chester.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think that kind of mindset, high performance. But what I really loved that you said was talking about a lifestyle and a culture. I was literally talking about somebody who's completely non-property, deals with startup companies, bit of a high flyer, but not really into property. And I was kind of explaining that we are kind of in a little world, aren't we? So look, we've got Kent, we've got Isle of Sheppey, so lots of Kents at the moment. That's all near me. Is that you don't know, we sort of live in this kind of bubble in property. It's a place where you can talk about mindset, can't you? Because generally in a normal, in a normal world, it's kind of a bit poo-pooed. If you start jumping around, like, some of the big boys, they'll be like, oh, this is terribly American, especially in the UK. And then equally, there's so many bits in property. There's so many different types of property. There's so many different types of strategy. There's so many acronyms. There's so many 3-letter words, all of these things that actually it is a little culture, and it is a kind of a lifestyle of its own. And actually to come into that is very different. And then when you're explaining what you do to others, it can actually be really confusing. Like, I've got friends that say, I just don't know what you do, Emma.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, okay, you've got a bit of property there, but you seem to do a few other bits and pieces, and then you talk about investors and all of this, and so it can be really kind of confusing. So I absolutely love that kind of analogy that the army is this kind of closed group. You all kind of understand each other, don't you?
Absolutely. It's got its own language. It's got when you stick a bunch of pilots together, they speak pilot language. And everybody else gets really bored and repelled from a group of pilots sitting with each other, because they're the most boring group of people that you could meet in the world. Not that property people are boring, by the way, but it's the same, right? You put a group of property people together, they're going to talk about property stuff and understand, and that's going to be a different language to everybody else. So it is very much a culture. It is a community. And I think that's really important, that people find their community when they're in property, because doing it by yourself can be a tough process, I think. So that having that support network around you is quite important.
Absolutely. So let's move on. So you said you started getting into your, BRRR, or however many R's it is, buy, refurbish, refinance. And, you definitely talked about these kind of away from you, further away. I mean, how do you feel like that now? Is that something, obviously you're still away from Winchester? Are you a fan of that?
No. So at the time I was living in Chester. I only moved down to Winchester a couple of years ago. So I spent pretty much most of the 2010 to 22 building my businesses and portfolios up in the northwest. So I was in it every day, right? And at the start I was in there doing the DIY, trying to work out how to do like push fit plumbing and all of that sort of stuff. And it was a rapid learning curve. And generally what I would do is try my hand at stuff work out it was rubbish, and then have to bring in a professional to come and redo it anyway, which is probably a standard process that a lot of people go. But that was kind of, again, the first experience of actually building out your team and understanding how to do things in a more leveraged basis, rather than being in the weeds of doing everything yourself all of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So just talk us a little bit more. So obviously you came out the army, you started doing these kind of up north, cheaper, buy, refurbish, refinance, trying to sort of pull as much of your money out. How did you then kind of move through coming to this situation where you're now looking at these kind of, as you call them, unicorn deals, which have that kind of more, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that more kind of mixed use, very much more kind of FRI, hands-off scenario. But what I love about what you talk about is you talk about doing, you know, one deal a year or two deals a year, and that adding on, you know, $3,000 to your turnover, to your income. So obviously that's, you know, going to be hugely appealing. So yeah, so how did you move through going from your BRRs to start with?
So the natural progression was, after single lets, I started and fell accidentally actually into HMOs. So my first HMO was an accident, but worked really nicely. So then started doing HMOs. At the time, I was also sourcing HMOs for a lot of military guys. I actually had some money in the bank, sourcing, project managing, and then managing. I set up an HMO letting agency, and everything just carried on growing. So I kept accumulating, then started doing sort of small blocks of flats. It sounds quite grand, but you know, nothing major, into commercial conversions. Then started, you know, picking up a few sort of mixed use buildings, and ended up in 2018 starting sort of first new build development. So really just progressing through those strategies. The honest answer to the question is, I got to a point before I started the first new build where my portfolio was probably too big, actually, and I had about sort of 90 tenants of my own in my own units that I owned, and that sounds great. I think everybody's got the expectation of just continue growing, continue building, right? Bigger is better. But the reality is bigger means more moving parts, more complexity, right? And more issues that it throws up on a day-to-day basis. So it was becoming quite a big management burden. I had my own management agency. Then I went through I'd guess, I call it like the pivot point, an 18-month period from the end of 2018, where firstly, my mother unexpectedly passed away. And she was running the letting agency for me because I'd sort of very, very cleverly leveraged and delegated that to her to run, and the team within the letting agency. And then I went through a separation, and then COVID hit all within 18 months. When COVID hit, my main contractor went bust, and it left us with a site that was unfinished and a lot of development finance burning a lot of interest through lockdown. So it was a challenging 18 months, and I took some time off in those lockdowns, looked at everything that was going on, and went through the sort of 80-20 process. We talked about it at the event that we met, didn't we? The Pareto principle, which is 20% or 80% of your income, 80% of your profits is going to come from 20% of whatever, your properties, your product. You know, 80% of your issues is going to come from 20% of your tenants. And when I reviewed it, that was really very much what I saw. And that 80-20, when I analyzed the mixed use buildings, I had a couple in my portfolio at that point, were the ones that were pretty much propping up the portfolio and giving the majority of the income and the least of the hassles. So after COVID, I set about restructuring everything, getting rid of, you know, a lot of my sort of older stock, more challenging stock, shrinking down the portfolio, and then focusing on buying, as you said, one unicorn deal a year. And that is now effectively my target. Is just one a year, but they're, you know, larger, which create a significant amount of monthly income in a hands-free manner, which, as you say, again, is generally doing FRI leases, so fully repairing and insuring leases on those units.
Amazing, amazing. And then I really wanted to ask a question out of that, because your path was, you know, potentially the path that, as you said, a lot of people imagine. I'm going to start off with, you know, a few buy-to-lets, and then I'm going to move on to HMOs, and then I'm going to, blocks of flats, and then I'm doing commercial conversions, and now I've got a letting agent and all this, that, and the other. Is that, looking back on your life, I mean, obviously you've changed it now, but now when because you do mentoring as well, is that kind of what you advise, or do you kind of advice? I mean, we all know that everyone has this kind of shiny penny syndrome. There are so many opportunities in property. They all seem very easy, but they're all equally as challenging. They have their challenges to achieve it. But do you think people should kind of be sticking to one thing? Do you think it's, you know, personality driven? Where do you come from with this kind of strategy and how people should move forward with their property journey?
I think ultimately at the end of the day, you need to do what works for you. But I've always said that the secret to success is not about the strategy you do, right? It's not about you. It's about your ability to focus, stay consistent, and have discipline. That's it, right? So focus. You know, I'm sure everybody has heard the acronym for it: follow one course until successful. So if we focus on one thing, build a portfolio or a strategy or whatever it is, it doesn't mean we can't then systemize it, delegate it away, and do something else. But what a lot of people do, exactly as you said, is shiny penny syndrome. And I think that's something that the industry is somewhat responsible for. When I say industry, I mean personal development, wealth creation, property training industry. It's great, fantastic, but very often doesn't serve people because they get distracted very easily. And you know yourself, you will go on YouTube or Facebook and you'll see a video here about something, then another video here, and you go, that looks awesome, this looks awesome, I can make money here, I can make money there. And it kind of overwhelms, or you do loads of things and you do them well, and then you've built something that's really difficult to manage. Okay, so benefit of hindsight and doing it for 10 years is a wonderful thing to have. And I think what a lot of people do with experience is they build up these sort of unmanageable machines, these beasts, if you like, which then become quite difficult to manage. Go, there's a better way. Let's actually restructure this now to make my life easier because there's too many moving parts. And I like to think that's, you know, why I work with all my clients is so I can sort of impart that experience and try and keep people on track, away from the shiny pennies, going down the train tracks to do something that works for them, but in a disciplined and consistent way that's building something that is manageable.
Yeah, I love that. I always say you need to be consistently persistent and persistently consistent. Kind of, it's that cyclical process, isn't it? Yeah, if anyone has had shiny penny syndrome, do drop a 1 in the chat box, because certainly I know when I started, there was just so many different things, and I like to get back. So it's really similar to you, is getting back to that foundation. What is it that really kind of suits us, we can stick to, and really keep going.